Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Chronically Overdressed. I'm Christine, the Glambassador. I think for most of us in the vintage community, the vintage lifestyle isn't solely about the clothes or even the hair or makeup. And while I personally live by the mantra vintage style, not vintage values, it's so much more nuanced than that. I love to learn about history and about how people lived in their daily lives. Now, I am under no illusion that I live in another time, and frankly, I don't want to. I am firmly rooted in the year 2023. I don't live my life as a 1940s or 1950s housewife. I love and embrace science, technology, progress, and the small freedoms that we are provided in our current time. I mean, if it weren't for technology, I wouldn't be with you right now. But through my constant journey of learning about those eras that I love so much, I realized that there's a lot of things that were done or things that are used that just make more sense than the modern counterparts. Sometimes modern technologies can add to that feeling of being rushed all the time. Everything has to be done so quickly. And it can really increase our anxieties. Our modern era can really feel disconnecting at times too. Obviously, I use technology on a daily basis, as I'm sure most of you do as well. It is part of my job. And of course, it keeps me connected to friends and family by using social media. And I use it as a huge resource for learning about some of the eras that I love and just really learning about the history. But choosing an old-fashioned method of doing something actually helps to keep me feeling grounded. It slows me down and it actually gives me a chance to breathe a little bit. I really like the idea of, keeping some of the past alive by choosing some of these old-fashioned methods or old-fashioned things, choosing them over a modern one. For me, it's not just the nostalgia of it or the fact that I love vintage. More often than not, I feel like the old-fashioned way just works better. Whether your vibe is vintage or cottagecore, grandma-core, or slow living, there are certain things that those of us who choose this way of life, things that we use or do in our everyday life that some may see as old-fashioned. So today I want to share with you some of those old-fashioned things that my husband and I choose to do in our daily life. Some of these things just really help me to understand a little bit more about maybe what life was like in those eras that I love so much. I also had this conversation with my patrons over on my Patreon page, and they were really helpful and gave me a lot of input on things that they do that also might seem a little old-fashioned. So I'll share some of that with you as well. And I hope that you'll share with me in the comments below anything that you do that might seem a little old-fashioned, or whether it's methodology or an actual item that you use that comes from a different era. So besides the fact that I dress in vintage style, do my hair and makeup in vintage style, I also love to choose vintage or antique furniture and decor for my surroundings. I've talked about this before on how I'm really making a concerted effort to kind of switch out some of my more contemporary, cheaply made pieces, I guess, with more vintage and antique pieces. And I've had some really great luck lately with Facebook Marketplace. I just showed a video about some of the pieces that I found. My grandfather, he owned a furniture store in San Diego when I was growing up. And I always admired the just well-built, really well-made, sturdy furniture that he had in store and also in his house. And I was fortunate enough through him, and then ultimately through my mom, I inherited a lot of those pieces. But, certain things like my vanity, those are things that I love to sit at my vanity and do my makeup. And that can sometimes be seen as old-fashioned. And I gotta say, sitting at my vintage vanity, putting on my makeup is one of the joys of my day. Okay, so here are some of the things that I do or use that may seem old-fashioned. I will freely admit I am not the coffee maker in the house. That is my husband's job. He is the coffee connoisseur. I tend to like my creamer with a hint of coffee in it. So to be honest, I don't care how the coffee tastes, but he does, and it's important to him. So some of the things that he does, he refuses to have an electric kettle. He likes to heat up his water on the stove in a, we have a stainless steel kettle, and he likes that process. He also uses a reusable coffee filter. It's just a cloth coffee filter, and we don't have to go buy coffee filters all the time. It works really well. It gives him the right type of coffee that he likes, and I'm fine drinking it as well. So staying in the kitchen, we don't own a microwave. So anytime we're cooking or reheating something, we are just reheating it on the stove. We've not had a microwave our entire marriage, and it's a choice that we made early on. And we're really happy with that choice. I think it tastes better to reheat something on the stove. We do have a toaster oven, and occasionally we'll use that to heat things up. But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of microwaves, and I don't think I've ever cooked with a microwave. But yeah, that's something that we don't have in our kitchen. One of my favorite things when I'm cooking or cleaning is to wear an apron. Aside from them being absolutely adorable, I have a beautiful collection of aprons that I just love. They're incredibly functional. Obviously, you're gonna wear an apron when you don't want to get your clothes dirty. So I will wear an apron when I'm cooking. I tend to be a pretty messy cook. I tend to fling things. Or even when I'm cleaning the house, I find that, especially if you're dusting, or I don't know, there's something about, having the apron on, and it's easier to wash the apron than have to wash another set of clothing. I'll also wear an apron when I'm gardening. Again, just helps to keep, the dirt off of you. Generally, my aprons have pockets in the front, which makes it really easy to put your tools in. So I love wearing an apron. It also kind of gets me in the mindset of doing the thing that I'm doing, whether it's, cooking or cleaning or gardening. And how can you say no to some of these absolutely gorgeous designs of aprons? So this next one, this was actually brought up by one of my patrons as well. And I thought, although it's just my husband and I, it's just the two of us here, we like to, cook our meals and actually sit at the dining room table. I use placemats, I use cloth napkins. We actually don't use disposable napkins. And we get to sit down and talk about our days and just talk about whatever. And, when I was growing up, my mom, I think maybe we had like one day a week that we would do that. My mom was a single mom for a really long time, and, she was working all the time. And so I sat in front of the TV with my TV tray a lot. And, it was just her and I for a long time. And I really enjoyed the dinner, like the dinner table dinners. That was always something that I really enjoyed because, especially when you're sitting across from somebody, you can just really have a nice conversation. And I think it's important to have those kind of slow down and, maybe put on some really nice music, light candles if you want. But I love that tradition that my husband and I started together years ago. We always wanted to make sure, there's times that we sit at the couch and watch TV if it's, a very casual type dinner. But for the most part, we do sit at the dining room table and kind of set the table. And, you know, I love my collection of placemats, my collection of napkins. And I hope that that's something that you guys do as well. It's just, it can be a really lovely, lovely connection with your family. Okay, so the next thing is using rags or cloths instead of paper towels. And it's funny, as I'm going through a lot of these things, I'm realizing how eco-friendly and economical a lot of these kind of old-fashioned ideas are. I'm a big fan of trying to be as ecological and economical as possible. So not having to buy a ton of paper towels and just throw them away. I have these little flannel cloths that work really, really well to clean up spills. And I have a separate little basket in my laundry room, and I just kind of plop them in there. And then when we do a load of laundry, they just go in with them. So it's, you know, I'd much rather use a rag or a cloth to clean up spills than a disposable paper towel. Speaking of cleaning, I do like to make my own cleaning products, and whether that's using some sort of a concentrate, I love Salsets and Castile soap, or just using, you know, ingredients that you pretty much already have in your kitchen. You know, baking soda is great, vinegar, just creating something that's, you know, it's more ecological and it's much more cost effective. Okay, so two things that I pretty much always keep in my purse are a handkerchief and a rain bonnet. I love having my beautiful handkerchiefs. You never know when you're gonna need it, whether you need to, you know, dab a tear from your eye or blow your nose or whatever. It's always so nice to have a handkerchief in your purse. And then of course my rain bonnet. You don't want to mess up your gorgeous vintage hair. So, you know, a lot of the rain bonnets that you can find, they're plastic, and so you can fold them up really, really well and just kind of stick them, you know, into your little side pocket in your purse. So I always have one on hand, and I always keep a handkerchief in my purse. And I think I mentioned this a while back that I took up cross stitch as a hobby. And I'm really loving it. And I'm starting to learn embroidery as well. So those are definitely two kind of more old-fashioned type hobbies, but I'm really loving it. It's helping my brain to just, it allows my brain to just kind of shut off for a little while. And it helps to keep me focused on the task. And I'm really enjoying that. And, you know, I know a lot of people knit or crochet, and I've done some knitting. I would love to learn how to crochet, but those kinds of hobbies, I think are, you know, I think they're starting to see a resurgence. But in general, yeah, I think people just kind of see them as a more old-fashioned type of hobby. But, you know, obviously you have something absolutely gorgeous at the end when you're finished that you can either keep or you can give as gifts. But I really like those old-fashioned hobbies. So the next thing is mending our clothes. I know a lot of people in the vintage community do this on a pretty regular basis, whether it's making small alterations or just, you know, fixing a button, putting a button back on, maybe fixing a small hole. But I think this is a pretty common thing within the vintage community. I know there's a lot of people that just know how to sew and create their own clothes, which I'm incredibly envious of. But at least knowing how to mend clothes so you can extend the life of them, again, so we're not putting clothes out into the landfill. I think within all of the vintage and cottagecore, slow living, all of those kinds of ways of life, there's an undercurrent of sustainability, and mending the clothes definitely falls into that. And last but not least, handwriting letters or postcards. Now this is something that I've done for quite some time. I've had a few pen pals in my life and I absolutely love it. When I started my Patreon, I knew that that was going to be one of my benefits for everybody, is they get a handwritten letter from me. And there's something just so amazing about sitting down and handwriting a letter or a postcard or even just a quick little note to somebody. It's kind of a lost art. We don't do it as much anymore, but you know, if you can just take a moment to handwrite a little letter, it's so meaningful. Anytime I get a handwritten note, it just moves me. It really does. So that's definitely something that I do on a pretty regular basis, and I just love it. Okay, so now I want to share with you some of the things that my patrons told me that they do on a regular basis that are a little bit more old-fashioned. So baking and cooking food from scratch, obviously. I really would love to make my own bread. I do have issues with gluten, so I'm gonna have to figure out some way of adjusting that. But I also want to make my own butter. I've not done that yet, but I will be doing that, I'm sure, someday soon. Making your own spice mixes, that is a really great one. I love making, you know, spice blends, and that's just really smart to have on hand. And then making your own laundry soap. I've not done that yet. I've seen some TikToks about how to put together a laundry soap, and I would love to try that. Okay, so this next one says, we frequently cook a period dinner and have period days where all meals are authentic in terms of recipes and ingredients. I love that idea. I have several cookbooks. I have a wonderful wartime edition, the Victory cookbook, that I want to start delving into and making a few things. But I love that idea of kind of making it a whole theme. That sounds really fun. Okay, next one. I cross stitch, embroider, cook all my meals from scratch. I collect antique and vintage glassware that I actually use day to day. I write letters home to family, print all my photos, and put them in albums. I love that. I love especially the glassware and the dishes. That's one thing. I'm still looking for a set of dishes. I just have plain white dishes right now, which are kind of boring. But I'm getting more glassware, and I really want to get better at using them on a daily basis. I know sometimes with vintage glassware and plates and stuff, we get a little scared sometimes to use them, but you know, that's what they're meant for. We need to use them. We need to love them. They need to be utilized. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about some of the old-fashioned things that I do, and I'd really love to hear from you on different things. What do you guys do that incorporate, you know, in your day-to-day life that others may seem as old-fashioned? Thanks again for watching. I will see you again soon. Bye.